Shutdown and securing. So this is what it looks like on the map. You're going to be coming out of Boeing Field. The Needle 1 will eventually go to flak. And then we join the airway to onset. We'll have a couple non-normals in between there, like we said, that hydraulic overheat and the wing anti-ice. And then we'll get that 010 heading to intercept that Seattle 035 radial outbound. We'll talk about that. And then we'll go back on a 080 heading to intercept that airway to onset. And then, of course, as we progress, we'll have a few more non-normals, including that engine failure where we can't relight it. Company will request that we divert to Spokane. So we'll get a diversion to Spokane, and then pretty much overhead Yankee X-ray Charlie. We'll get a turn to Spokane. And then on the way in, we'll get direct to Hunab, which is one of the initial approach fixes leading to the DME arc transition, 10 DME arc transition, into a waypoint on the legs page. Where this is the arc, and then there's Spokane. The airport's somewhere outside of Spokane, on the other side of Spokane. And then, of course, this is just the missed approach. And then back for the ILS approach, back in. Okay, we're going to look at the PowerPoint presentation on this. So we are going to have a start valve problem on start. Again, we will have engine 3 and 4 will be running. The auto start will be inoperative. So we'll be doing a manual start on engines 1 and 2. We're going to assume that we had already read the engine manual start procedure from the supplemental section of the FCOM. We did that, I think it was last week, and so we're not going to do that again. We'll assume we had already read through that. And so we'll do a manual start on engine 2 and a manual start on engine 1. And during one of the starts, we'll have a start valve problem. The first problem will be that the start valve does not open. And let's look at the QRH for that. So if the start valve doesn't open, you're going to get an engine start valve message. Okay, so engine 1, 2, 3, 4 start valve is 7.49. And the condition is that the start valve is not in the commanded position. So we've taken the start switch and we pulled it out, but the start valve didn't open, so there's a disagreement between the valve position and the commanded position of the start valve itself. So it says ground or in-flight start using bleed air source may be unsuccessful, and then choose one on the ground, and of course we are on the ground, and that would be the end of the engine start valve procedure. So it really doesn't tell you what to do after that. Well, if the start valve didn't open, some airlines will have a manual override start procedure in their supplemental section. Now, Boeing does not. So if I go to the FCOM here and I look at the engine section, you'll see there's no, there's a manual start procedure for the freighter and for the passenger airplane. But, and there's a ground pneumatic start, a cross bleed start, and continuous ignition, but there's no manual override start procedure. So some airlines will have this, and some airlines will not. And of course, most airlines do not. If we had a start valve problem, you go to the MEL and you check the MEL on it, and the MEL would kind of lead you in the flight crew operating procedure that if the start valve didn't open, what you could do. And they're basically going to tell you that you can have a mechanic go out to the engine and manually open the start valve. So he can go out to the engine number, whatever it's going to be, I think 2. He can go out to engine number 2, and he can go ahead and open a little access door, and he's got a tool that he can put in there, and he can manually open the start valve, coordinating with you when to do that. And then, of course, since he's manually opened the start valve, he'd have to manually close the start valve. And he could do that at 50% N2, and he'd want to know when that is from you. So in order for you to communicate with him, and then if you're in the flight position on your audio panel, and you turn that service interphone switch to on, that will connect the service interphone to the flight interphone system, and basically then you can talk to any of the ports that are around the airplane. And there's like a lot of ports around the airplane, because the mechanics can plug in anywhere. When they're working on the airplane, they can plug in the tail, they can plug in on the sides, they can plug in on the bottom. Yeah, they can plug into various areas, including the engines, where you could then communicate with the flight deck. And so certainly anybody that's hooked up at engine number 2, as long as you were in flight on the audio control panel, and that you took that service interphone switch, which is on the overhead panel in the center, part of the overhead panel, and you turn that service interphone switch on, that would connect that service interphone to the flight interphone. And then you'd be able to talk to that mechanic out at the engine. So we'd have to do that. And then the mechanic would pretty much lead us through what we need to do in terms of pulling the start switch out. He's going to go ahead and take his tool and then open the start valve. He would call that he's opening the start valve. And then you would see rotation, and you would see oil pressure in N1, and then you'd start the engine normally. He would want you to, at 50% N2, he's going to want you to tell him when you're at 50% N2, and at that time he's going to close the start valve manually. And then, of course, once the start valve's closed, you would verify it as the crew, and then he could go ahead and then button up at the engine, take his tool away and close the access door and make sure he's clear of the engine. And then you'd coordinate with the ramp personnel in the nose there on out to make sure that he's clear of the engine before you start the other engine. And the only thing the MEL would basically say when you looked at it is that an in-flight start using starter assist may not be available, because if the start valve didn't open automatically, then if a mechanic had to manually open it and close it, then when you're in flight, you may not be able to open that start valve if you need a starter assist. You could do a windmilling assist, but you may not be able to do a starter assist if you had that little X bleed displayed that we talked about on the N2. If that was displayed, you may not be able to do a in-flight start using starter assist. So that's what the MEL would tell you. So you'd be okay per MEL to go with that problem. However, just with that caution that you may not be able to do an in-flight start. Once we get to 50% N2, we're going to tell the mechanic to close the start valve. He's going to go ahead and close the start valve, and then he's going to tell us that he broke his tool, and he's going to have to go back to the maintenance shed to get another tool. And so we will see that the start valve did not close, and we're going to get an ICAS caution message that is starter cutout on that engine. In this case, it'll be starter cutout number 2. And we're going to go to the checklist for starter cutout 2 when that happens. That's going to be under the S's. So that'll be starter cutout 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 decimal 60. And you can see the condition is the start valve does not close. Engine start switch, and in our case it's going to be number 2. Engine start switch number 2 push. Choose one, starter cutout message blanks or starter cutout message stays shown. In our case, the starter cutout message is going to stay shown. So we'll go to step 3. Engine bleed air switch number 2 off. And then the cell anti-ice for the affected engine is not available. And if we're on the freighter, which is GE engines, now we're going to be a passenger airplane, but we're still GE engines, so the 570 would apply here. Reverse thrust for the affected engine is not available because our reverse on the GE engines are pneumatic. So if you had that bleed off, you wouldn't be able to get reverse. On the Pratts, they're hydraulic, but on the GEs, they're pneumatic for the reversers. In some airplanes, if the start valve does not close, you have to shut down the engine immediately. It's not that way in this airplane. A lot of people, if they're coming from other airplanes, they want to shut down the engine immediately. This is kind of a beefier starter motor. It's a more heavy-duty starter motor, and it's not necessary to shut down the engine right away. You're not going to do any damage to the starter. However, you have time to get out the checklist, read the checklist, do the checklist, and remove the air source to the starter motor, and without doing any damage. So on other airplanes, it was like an immediate action item. You had to bring the fuel control switch to cut off if you saw this any kind of starter cutout problem. But with the 400, the 747, it's not a problem. So it is not an immediate action item. It's a checklist item. It's go to the checklist when you get the message. Now from there, of course, the mechanic's going to come back out. He's going to have a new tool that he's going to insert, and then he's going to go ahead and manually close the start valve. And then we'll just verify that the start light extinguishes on the start switch, and that the ICAS message extinguishes, goes away. And in that case, he'll be good then to go. He'll be okay per MEL to go with that particular problem, that he manually closed the start valve. And then he'll button up at the engine, and then we'll coordinate with the ground personnel to start the other engine, the number one engine. So those are the two scenarios we'll do. One with the start valve does not open, and the other with the start valve that does not close. We said that